The van never saw it coming. It was just after sunset when the Department of Homeland Security vehicle rolled slowly through a crowded city street. Traffic was heavy, horns were blaring, people were shouting. Then, out of nowhere, a pickup truck slammed into the side of the van. Metal screamed, glass exploded. The impact spun the vehicle sideways, throwing two federal officers against the doors. Before they could even reach their radios, fists and objects hit the windows. Someone screamed, "Get them out!" In seconds, the street turned into chaos. The officers were trapped. The engine was dead. Smoke curled into the air. Outside, the crowd grew louder, angrier. Someone kicked the driver's door. Another person smashed a side mirror clean off. A rock flew through the back window, missing an officer's head by inches. This was not a crash. This was an attack. As the officers tried to lock the doors and call for backup, one thought cut through the noise and fear. This is happening more often now. And as the shouting outside grew louder, the question became terrifyingly clear. Would help arrive in time? That moment, frozen in fear and violence, is where this story begins. Because since 2025, scenes like this have been unfolding across the United States. DHS vehicles, marked and unmarked, have become targets, not just for anger, not just for protest, but for direct, dangerous attacks. And what happened next on that street would shock even seasoned federal agents. But to understand why this moment mattered so much, we have to go back to how it all started. Months earlier, things looked different on the surface. DHS vehicles moved quietly through cities and towns every day. Some carried immigration officers, others transported investigators, border agents, or security teams. Most trips were routine. Officers followed set routes. They kept their heads down. They avoided trouble. But beneath that calm, tension was building. Political anger was rising across the country. Immigration debates grew louder. Social media posts became more heated. Protests spread from city to city. And slowly, something changed. The anger stopped being just words. The first reports came in quietly. A DHS SUV in the Southwest had its tires slashed overnight. In the Midwest, a government vehicle was spray-painted with threats. On the West Coast, officers reported being followed after leaving federal buildings. At first, these incidents were treated as vandalism or harassment. Then, the attacks escalated. In one city, a DHS vehicle was surrounded during a protest. People banged on the hood and windows while officers waited inside, afraid to move. In another state, a driver swerved directly at an ICE van, forcing it off the road. Officers escaped without injury, but the message was clear. These were no longer accidents. Federal officials began tracking the incidents more closely. By mid-2025, the numbers were impossible to ignore. Reports showed a sharp rise in rammings, assaults, and direct threats aimed at DHS vehicles nationwide. The attacks were happening in big cities and small towns. They happened during protests and on quiet streets, day and night, sometimes with crowds, sometimes with just one attacker. And the fear among officers was growing. Many agents said the most frightening part was not knowing when it would happen. A routine drive could turn dangerous in seconds. A red light could become a trap. A traffic jam could turn into a mob. Still, most of the public had no idea how serious it had become until the videos started to surface. Short clips spread online showing DHS vehicles being chased, windows smashed, tires blown out, officers shouting for help. In some videos, crowds cheered. In others, people screamed in panic as violence exploded around them. Officials warned that the situation was becoming unstable. They blamed a mix of political tension, misinformation, and hostile environments fueled by online anger. They stressed that attacks on federal vehicles put everyone at risk, not just officers, but pedestrians, drivers, and nearby families. But warnings did little to slow the trend. By late 2025, DHS changed protocols. Routes were altered, vehicles traveled in pairs. Some agents removed markings to avoid attention. Others wore plain clothes even while on duty. Yet the attacks kept coming. Then came the night that changed everything. Back on that crowded street, the officers inside the damaged van heard sirens in the distance, but the crowd outside didn't move. If anything, they pressed closer. Someone tried to pry open the rear door. Another voice shouted that the officers shouldn't be allowed to leave. Inside, one officer was bleeding from a cut on his forehead. The other struggled to keep his hand steady while speaking into the radio. Backup was close, but not close enough. A second vehicle suddenly blocked the road ahead, trapping the van completely. For a terrifying moment, it looked planned, coordinated, like the officers had been set up. The crowd surged again. Then something even more dangerous happened. A loud crack rang out, not a gunshot, but close enough to freeze everyone in place. A heavy object hit the windshield, spiderwebbing the glass. The officers ducked. One of them screamed for everyone to get down. This was no longer about damage. Lives were at risk. As police sirens finally grew louder, the crowd began to scatter. Some ran, others melted back into traffic as if nothing had happened. When local police arrived, the street looked almost normal again, except for the wrecked DHS van and two shaken officers inside. That incident would become one of many cited in federal reports. It showed how fast a situation could turn violent, how quickly anger could become action, and how exposed federal workers had become. After that night, DHS leadership went public. They confirmed what officers already knew. Attacks on DHS and ICE vehicles had surged dramatically since 2025. The trend was nationwide. The danger was real. Officials warned that if the violence continued, someone would be killed, not because of an accident, but because of a deliberate attack. And the most chilling part? Some attackers were not hiding. They filmed themselves. They posted clips online. They bragged. They turned violence into content. This raised even more concern inside federal agencies. If attacks were being encouraged and shared, what would stop the next one from going further? As investigators reviewed footage and reports, a pattern began to form. Certain cities showed repeated incidents, certain routes became hotspots, and certain dates linked to political events or protests saw spikes in violence. The country was watching a dangerous shift happen in real time. And yet, many people still believed it couldn't get worse. They were wrong, because as 2026 began, new reports suggested the attacks were becoming bolder, faster, and more coordinated. Officers feared that the next ambush would not end with broken glass, but with something far more deadly. And somewhere out there, someone was already planning the next strike. The warning came too late. At 6:12 a.m., a DHS operations center received a short message marked urgent. It said only this: increased chatter, possible coordinated action today. No city name, no time, no faces, just a cold sentence that made supervisors sit up straight. By 6:45 a.m., agents across several states were already on the road. One of them was inside a white ICE transport van moving through an industrial area just outside a major city. The sky was still gray. Warehouses lined the street. There were no crowds, no protests, nothing that looked dangerous. That's when the black sedan appeared. It pulled out from a side street and slowed directly in front of the van. The DHS driver tapped the brakes. Then another car slid in behind them, then a third on the left. In seconds, the van was boxed in. The radio crackled. Possible hostile maneuver, the driver said, trying to stay calm. The sedan in front slammed its brakes. The DHS van hit it hard. Airbags exploded. The world went white. Before the officers could even clear the smoke, doors flew open. Men ran toward the van. One held a metal bar. Another had a heavy chain wrapped around his arm. Someone shouted, "Now! Now!" This was not random.
It was planned. Inside the van, one officer screamed that his arm was broken. Another tried to kick open the passenger door, but it wouldn't budge. Outside, metal slammed against the side panel again and again. The sound echoed through the empty street like a drumbeat. This attack would later be described in internal reports as one of the closest calls DHS had ever seen, and it nearly ended in death. Backup arrived fast this time. Local police rushed in, weapons drawn. The attackers scattered, leaving behind damaged cars and one burning trash pile set in the middle of the road. When it was over, the silence felt unreal. The officers survived, barely. That morning changed everything. By noon, DHS leadership held emergency calls. Analysts spread maps across screens. Red dots marked incidents from the past year. The pattern was now impossible to deny. These were not isolated acts of anger. They were connected. Some attacks happened during protests. Others happened on quiet streets. Some involved crowds. Others involved just 2 or 3 people who knew exactly what they were doing. And all of them targeted one thing: DHS vehicles. Officials began digging deeper. They reviewed months of video. They read thousands of online posts. They tracked threats that had once seemed like empty talk. What they found was chilling. There were posts calling DHS vehicles moving targets, messages telling people to block them, trap them, or make them stop. Some posts even shared tips: where vehicles usually parked, what time they moved, how to recognize unmarked units. This wasn't just rage, it was guidance. Officers on the ground felt the shift immediately. Some refused to drive alone. Others asked to change routes daily. Many stopped wearing anything that marked them as federal employees when off duty. One agent said it felt like being hunted. Still, DHS tried to calm the public. Officials stressed that most Americans were peaceful, that these attackers were a small group, that law enforcement was adapting. But inside the agency, fear was growing, because the attacks were evolving. Early incidents were mostly vandalism, scratches, broken mirrors, slashed tires. Now there were rammings, ambushes, blockades, and attackers who stayed long enough to cause real harm before escaping. Then came the video that shook everyone. It appeared online late one night. Grainy footage showed a DHS SUV driving through traffic. A car swerved into it, forcing it toward the curb. The SUV clipped a pole and stopped. The video cut before the attack, but the caption said enough: "Next time, we finish it." The clip spread fast. Within hours, federal investigators were trying to trace the source, but the damage was already done. Officers across the country saw it. Families saw it. Fear spread. One agent's wife begged him to quit. Another officer started parking his government vehicle miles away from home, afraid neighbors might recognize it. Morale dropped.
Yet the work continued. DHS could not simply stop moving, could not stop responding. Every day, vehicles still rolled out, and every day, officers wondered if today would be the day someone decided to go further. Then, during a routine transfer in the Northeast, it almost happened. The van was stopped at a red light. No protest, no crowd, just normal traffic. A man stepped off the sidewalk and walked calmly toward the driver's window. He raised a gun. The officer reacted on instinct, hitting the gas just as a shot rang out. The bullet shattered the side mirror. The van sped through the light, tires screaming. Police later arrested the suspect a few blocks away. He claimed he acted alone, but the message was clear. The line had been crossed. After that incident, DHS quietly raised its threat level. Armored vehicles were requested, escort protocols expanded, joint patrols with local police increased in high-risk areas. Still, officials knew something uncomfortable. Every visible change made the vehicles stand out more. More armor meant more attention, more escorts meant more notice, and attention in this climate was dangerous. Meanwhile, critics argued loudly. Some said DHS brought this on itself. Others said federal officers were being unfairly targeted for doing their jobs. The country felt split. And in that split, violence grew. Another report landed on a supervisor's desk late one Friday.
It detailed a planned action discussed in a private online group. The message mentioned timing, routes, and a phrase that made the room go quiet. "Don't let them drive away this time." Law enforcement scrambled, patrols increased, vehicles were rerouted, agents were told to stay alert. But not everyone got the message. That evening, as the sun dipped low, a DHS convoy entered a downtown area for what should have been a simple operation. Streets were busy, people walked dogs, kids laughed near a corner store. Everything looked normal, until someone threw the first object. Then another. Traffic stopped, cars boxed the convoy in, shouts filled the air. Someone climbed onto a hood, another person smashed a window. An officer inside the lead vehicle yelled for everyone to stay down. Then a loud bang echoed through the street. Not a rock, not a fist, something heavier, something meant to break through. The sound froze everyone in place. For a split second, the city seemed to hold its breath, and as smoke began to rise from the front of the convoy, one terrible thought spread through every radio channel at once. This time, it might not end the same way. The explosion wasn't loud like in the movies. It was sharp, short, violent. A flash burst from the front of the convoy, followed by thick gray smoke that swallowed the street in seconds. People screamed and ran. Cars slammed into reverse. Someone fell trying to climb off the hood of the lead DHS vehicle. Inside that vehicle, the officers were stunned but alive. The object that hit them wasn't a bomb. It was a heavy metal container packed with flammable liquid. It shattered on impact, igniting briefly before burning out. It was crude, sloppy, but it was intentional, and it could have killed someone. Sirens wailed from every direction. Local police, fire trucks, and ambulances flooded the area. Officers dragged shaken civilians away from the smoke. Firefighters sprayed foam over the front of the convoy, while agents were rushed out through the rear doors. One officer collapsed on the sidewalk, shaking uncontrollably. Another stared at the blackened hood of the vehicle and whispered, "They meant to trap us." That night, the story finally broke into the open. News outlets across the country reported on the attempted attack. Officials confirmed what had been rumored for months. Attacks on DHS vehicles were rising fast, growing more dangerous, and spreading nationwide. The public reaction was immediate and divided. Some people were shocked. They had no idea federal officers were facing this level of danger on U.S. streets. Others brushed it off, saying government vehicles were symbols, not people. But for the agents inside those vehicles, the danger was painfully real. In the days that followed, DHS released internal data to lawmakers. The numbers were stark. Since 2025, reported attacks had surged dramatically. Rammings, blockades, assaults, threats, dozens of serious incidents, hundreds of close calls, and many more never reported publicly. Officials testified behind closed doors. They spoke of fear, about families begging officers to quit, about agents who jumped every time a car slowed near them. One official said something that stuck. "We are one mistake away from a funeral." That sentence traveled fast inside the agency. Behind the scenes, investigators worked non-stop. They arrested several suspects connected to recent attacks. Some acted alone, others were loosely linked through online groups. Many said the same thing during questioning. They didn't see officers.
They saw targets. That mindset scared federal leaders more than anything else. Because once people stop seeing human beings, violence becomes easier. Meanwhile, DHS changed again. Vehicles were rotated constantly. Routes were randomized. Some operations moved to nighttime. Others were delayed or canceled altogether if intelligence suggested risk. Still, the attacks didn't fully stop. In one southern city, a DHS SUV was chased for miles before losing its pursuers.
In another state, officers found nails scattered across a roadway near a federal facility. In a quiet suburb, a parked vehicle was set on fire while agents were inside a nearby building. Each incident added weight. Each one raised the same question: how far will this go? Officers talked among themselves more openly now. Some admitted they were scared every time they turned the key. Others said the fear had turned into anger. A few said they felt numb. One veteran agent put it simply: "I don't worry about criminals anymore. I worry about traffic." Public officials urged calm. They warned that attacking federal vehicles was a serious crime with severe penalties. They asked leaders on all sides to lower the temperature. But the streets told a different story. Online, videos of confrontations continued to spread. Some were edited to look dramatic. Others cut off before showing police response. Comments cheered, mocked, encouraged. The cycle fed itself. Then came the incident that forced a national pause. Late one evening, a DHS vehicle transporting detainees was driving through a rural highway. No city, no protest, just darkness and trees. A truck approached from the opposite direction. At the last second, it crossed the center line. The DHS driver swerved hard, narrowly avoiding a head-on collision. The truck clipped the rear of the vehicle and sped away into the night. No one was hurt, but investigators later found messages on the suspect's phone. He had written that night, "I almost did it." That message changed the tone of everything, because it showed intent, not anger, not impulse, intent. Federal officials went public again. This time, the message was blunt. Attacks on DHS vehicles were no longer just protests turning violent. They were becoming deliberate acts meant to injure or kill. The country had crossed into dangerous territory. Communities reacted in different ways. Some city leaders condemned the violence and increased protection around federal operations. Others stayed silent, afraid of backlash. Families of officers spoke out for the first time. They described sleepless nights, kids asking why people hated their parents, wives and husbands tracking government vehicles on apps just to know their loved ones were still moving. Behind every statistic was a person. As winter wore on, the attacks slowed slightly, but not enough to ease fears. Intelligence reports warned that calmer periods often came before spikes, that copycat actions were likely, that one successful attack could inspire many more. Officers were told to stay alert, to trust their instincts, to leave areas early if something felt wrong. But instincts can't stop everything. The final report of the season landed quietly. It summarized the year in cold language: rising threats, escalating tactics, high risk of lethal outcome if trend continued. At the bottom was a single line: next incident may redefine response nationwide. No one wanted to imagine what that meant.